Thank you, Helen. And now I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Jaideep Kapur and Dr. Howard Goodkin to present the 2018 and final Lennox and Lombroso lecture. As we have announced, this year marks a change in the naming of the Lennox Award to the Founders Award, and there will also be a change to the name of this lecture, which our presenters will address in their talk. Dr. Kapur is the Eugene Meyer III Professor of Neuroscience in the Department of Neurology at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He cares for patients through the Fitz E. Dreyfuss Comprehensive Epilepsy Program at the university and serves as the Director of the Neuroscience Center of Excellence. He received his MBBS in Medicine from the University of Delhi and his PhD in Neuroscience from the University of Virginia, completed his EEG Epilepsy Fellowship at the University of Michigan. His primary research interest is the pathophysiology of status epilepticus and the mechanisms and pathways of seizure spread. His laboratory studies mechanisms of rapid plasticity of GABA and glutamate-mediated neurotransmission. Another area of research is regulation of seizures by hormonal fluctuations. He's the co-leader of the NIH-funded multi-center established status epilepticus treatment trial, ESET, and Dr. Kapur is a past president of AES, and in 2013 received the AES Basic Science Award. He currently serves as chair of the Lennox Lombroso trustees within AES. Dr. Goodkin is the Schur Professor of Neurology and Pediatrics at the University of Virginia. He serves as chair of the UVA Department of Neurology and director of pediatric neurology. Howard is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with degrees in bioengineering and obtained his MD and PhD in neuroscience from Washington University at St. Louis. He completed postdoctoral training at St. Louis Children's Hospital in pediatrics and Boston Children's Hospital in pediatric neurology and clinical neurophysiology epilepsy. Dr. Goodkin is a clinician investigator with research focus of elucidating the cellular and molecular mechanism that contribute to the pathogenesis of status epilepticus. In addition, he was a founding member of the Pediatric Status Epilepticus Research Group, a multi-center collaboration seeking to improve the care of children with pharmacoresistant status epilepticus. Dr. Goodkin has recently been appointed treasurer-elect of AES and currently serves on the AES Board of Directors and is a trustee of the Lennox Lombroso Fund. He has been a member of the Epilepsy Fellowship Program Directors Committee, past chair of the Education and Professional Development Committee, CME Review Committee, and the Archives Committee. In addition to service to AES, he is currently an associate editor of Epilepsy Research, member of the editorial board of Annals of Neurology and of Pediatric Neurology. So, I want to say a few words, since not all of you were at the business meeting before we start. The Lennox Award Lecture name change. This process was initiated December 2017 board meeting at the request of Jaideep Kapur, past president of AES, chair of Lennox Lombroso trustees. We convened a task force with diverse perspectives to thoroughly review the issue, make a recommendation to the board. Task force recommended changing the name of the Lennox Award to the Founders Award in 2018, and the board further recommended changing the name of Lennox Lombroso Lecture to the Lombroso Lecture starting 2019. These recommendations were affirmed and approved by the Lennox and Lombroso trustees. You will now get to hear a detailed version of the reasons for this change to replace the usual Lennox Lombroso Lecture, which next year will resume as a premier scientific lecture, but as needed in certain years will be about issues of diversity and ethics. And now, before we start the lecture, let me call up Drs. Kapur and Goodkin to receive the Lennox Lombroso Lecture Award. They messed up those slides.
Let's go.
Okay, the Lennox Lombroso Lecture 2018. Lennox Lombroso Lecture is given each year to a clinician or scientist who is considered to be an outstanding investigator in the field of epilepsy research. The Lennox and Lombroso Fund supports this award. The Lennox Lombroso Lectureship this year is presented to Jaideep Kapur, MD, PhD, and Howard Goodkin, MD, PhD. Thank you.
Howard will go first.
Thank you, Shlomo. As we wait for my first slides to come up, hopefully, let me say how honored I am to be giving this award and presenting on what I know about the history of William G. Lennox. Before starting, I think it's important that we at least spend some time thinking about name changes and realize that changing names should not be something frivolous. Indeed, changing of a name of something we commemorate should actually be quite rare. It should be the exception and not the rule. And anytime we begin to think about changing a name, that comes with obligations. Independent of whether we change the name or not, we have the obligation that the history be remembered, it be shared, it be understood, and all history should be placed in the context of the time in which it occurred, as well as in our own current times. Decision to rename should never equal erasure of history. All of us should be on a guard against allowing history to be erased. Our job is to maintain that history at all time, and therefore I think it's important at onset to recognize that the decision of the board to rename the Lennox Award and the Lennox and Lombroso Lecture should not be misconstrued in any way as an attempt to erase Dr. William Lennox's significant contributions to epilepsy. We should also think about what it means to commemorate. When we commemorate historical figures and events, we need to be aware that we are at the risk for creating legends. And therefore, we have the continual obligation to assure that the complete history is maintained and that we avoid losing part of that history in the making of a legend. We also need to recognize that commemorating someone not only speaks to the values at the time that the commemoration occurs, but our decision to continue to commemorate speaks to who we are and what our values are. And therefore, paraphrasing the 2015 AES strategic statement, I want to just state or proffer that we're an inclusive society that seeks to recognize the many who have made contributions to the mission to eradicate epilepsy and its consequences, people like Jack and Helen, who we've just heard from, and that we are a society that shares the value of improving lives of people, indeed all people with epilepsy, especially those who are the most vulnerable. So my talk today is split into two parts. We'll look at William G. Lennox and his campaign against epilepsy. We'll look at why was he called to epilepsy? What was his professional success? What was his recognition? And then we'll turn to Lennox's views on eugenics and euthanasia. Eugenics is a movement that grew out of the progressive era, and then Lennox's writings before World War II and then after the atrocities of World War II are known. I'll then turn the stage over to Jaideep, who will look at the fallacy and the consequences of eugenics, taking what I have to say a little bit deeper into modern times. So just before I get going, I think it's important to make a disclaimer that some may find some of the content, some of the pictures that are going to be shown disturbing. So William Lennox is born in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He attends Colorado College as an undergraduate. And he has one mission, a mission stated here as president of the Student Volunteer Band of the Christian Endeavor Movement. It is my permit, if God permit, to become a foreign missionary. Unfortunately for Dr. Lennox, his application to Boston University Seminary was rejected because he had failed to take Latin or Greek as an undergraduate at Colorado College. Upon graduation of Colorado College, he spends time on his family ranch and then dedicates himself to becoming a medical missionary. His application to Harvard Medical School, again, rejected, this time because of insufficient chemistry. But through an interview process with the chemist Otto Frohland at Harvard, who takes a liking to William Lennox and describes William Lennox as a good hard worker, the decision is reversed. and William Lennox goes off to Harvard Medical School. Upon graduating of Harvard Medical School, he'll spend time at the Massachusetts General Hospital as a house officer, and then finally will achieve his goal of becoming a medical missionary as he and his family take off for Peking, where he'll work in the Rockefeller-funded Peking Union Medical College. There, unfortunately, although not stated in this quote, there's evidence that both his wife, as well as his two children, Margaret and Mary Bell, will get sick. Here in this quote, Lennox says it's dysentery. In other places, Margaret will say it's whooping cough. But this illness leads Lennox to begin to ask, how can we serve in China and at the same time safeguard the life and health of the children entrusted to us? Lennox has answered this question. He'll turn into a master's thesis, which he presents for a degree at the University of Denver, and you can see the cover of that master's thesis here, titled The Health of Missionary Families in China, a Statistical Study. We don't know exactly when, but either before leaving China or upon arriving home to the US, Margaret Lennox, as many of us know, is one of the principal founders of the epilepsy program at Yale, and a dedicated researcher in febrile seizures. Either before leaving China or upon arriving home, she has her first seizure. And at the peak of her epilepsy, she was having approximately 20 seizures a month between the ages of 7 and 9 years of age. And as we see here, Margaret says it's because I developed convulsions and thus gave Father his future missionary field. So Margaret was truly Dr. Lennox's calling to epilepsy. And he took this calling seriously. As we would expect a medical missionary to, he began his campaign or his fight against epilepsy, a fight that he fought on 3 fronts, as he outlines here in his article, The Campaign Against Epilepsy, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in 1937. He says the first front should be a harder search for knowledge. Research was greatly needed in this area. He said we need to do a better job of caring for people with epilepsy. And so he dedicated himself to improving the care of people with epilepsy. And he said we had to do a greater job of diffusing what we learn. We need to do a better job of making epilepsy acceptable for those who have it. And so he set out on a mission of education. And we all know that he had great success in research, working with Stanley Cobb, Halliwell Davis, Gene Davis, Albert Grass, Erna and Frederick Gibbs. He would do early studies of cerebral vasculature and blood flow. He would seek the anti-seizure mechanism that we still are looking for, of starvation and ketogenic diet. He would look at how blood concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide change with seizures and show how carbon dioxide could trigger absence seizures. He did early correlation of seizure type with specific EEG patterns. And as we all know, he did early studies seeking to understand how genetics influence epilepsy in the twin studies that he did with Jolie, published in 1954. Clinical care, he introduced the first anti-absence seizure medication, Tridione. He did elegant descriptions of the epilepsy syndrome that would later bear his name, in which he describes a stare, a jerk, and a fall. And he really set out the idea of a multidisciplinary seizure unit, a comprehensive epilepsy center, in which we all continue to strive to obtain. First known as the Diagnostic Research Training Center for Epilepsy at Boston Children's Hospital, where he arrives in 1944, later renamed the Seizure Unit. And he made great advances in education. He published somewhere close to 240 articles, give or take, based on my abilities to search the literature. And these are articles in both the lay press as well as in the professional literature. His efforts lead to the American League Against Epilepsy, or what we later renamed the American Epilepsy Society. And here I've highlighted the American Medical Association's daily bulletin at their 87th meeting in Kansas City in 1936, announcing that an Association for the Study of Epilepsy, an American branch of the ILEE, has been founded with William Lennox as its first president on May 12, 1936. Dr. Lennox was important in reconstituting the ILAE after World War I. He single-handedly maintained epilepsy during World War II. And he put lots of effort in founding lay groups such as the American Epilepsy League. For all this, he was applauded and received honors from his colleagues. In 1946, the William G. Lennox Fund was created by men like Eugene Ziskind and announced by Wilder Penfield at the 1946 meeting of the Association for Research in Nervous and Mental Diseases. He was finally got a degree from Boston University, being honored with a Doctor of Science, an honorary Doctor of Science in '48. He shares the Lasker Award with Frederick Gibbs in '51 for their work on early descriptions of EEG, and in '56 he wins a scientific award from the American Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. Now, Lennox comes of age in the progressive era. This is a time, approximately 1890 to 1920, where we see greater efficiency to government. We have the passage of four amendments to the U.S. Constitution, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, giving women the right to vote. We see workers' protection, consumer protection, business regulations, all as part of the progressive era. We also see prohibition, and during this time we see the growth of the eugenics movement. The word eugenics is first found in this book, Inquiries into Human Faculty and the Development, published by Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's half-cousin, in 1883. It's a made-up word by Galton, which simply means good in birth or noble in heredity. And so what are the founding principles of eugenics? Well, as stated here on this certificate that was handed out at the Second International Conference on Eugenics, which was held in 1921 at the American History Museum in New York, eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. And how do we do that? Well, as in Galton words, what we do is we check the birth rate of the unfit instead of allowing them to come into being. And the second object is the improvement of the race by furthering the productivity of the fit, or the noble in heredity, by early marriage and healthful rearing of children. So when this does not occur, when the noble in heredity are not producing at a rate fast enough, and the unfit are producing at too rapid a rate, and the death rate of the fit exceeds that of the birth rate, what occurs is race suicide. And race suicide was a big concern of the eugenicists, who were worried about our self-directing of human evolution. And you can see here taken from a letter that Theodore Roosevelt wrote on White House stationery in 1907, concerns about race suicide during the progressive era. I don't know exactly when Dr. Lennox began to imbibe eugenics principles. It certainly was part of American culture at the time that he was coming of age. It's in magazines, it's in the religious press, it can be found in comic strips. It can be found in the movies, one movie entitled The Black Stork, which has to do with allowing the unfit to die instead of giving them medical care. I have searched the archive, the course catalogs of classes offered at Colorado College during the years that Dr. Lennox attends that college, and could find no titles that suggest eugenics teachings. But we do know that when he arrives in Boston around 1910, that Harvard, many of the professors are speaking and teaching eugenics. This includes Emeritus President Charles William Eliot, the current President Lowell, Frank Taussig, the economist, as well as others that I've listed there. In 1936, we began for the first time to see Lennox begin to espouse eugenics principles in his writing. When he asked in the American Scholar, the magazine or journal of the Phi Beta Kappa, he asked, should they live? And who are they? He tells us they are the unproductive and the socially useless. And he tells us the problem is the elimination of the whole fit is almost wholly ignored by physicians. And it's a problem because the number of unproductive members in which society can support is limited. So he asks, what should we do to those who are some slip of the hand of him who made them, lumps of matter in human form but without human mind? For these people, he says, mercy is my plea, not only for the miserably living defectives, but also for the curables, those who suffer because we're spending money on the incurables, and therefore clogging up our institutions and our hospitals and not giving more focus to the curables. Who should make this decision of should they live or should they die? Well, Dr. Lennox suggests that the selection of the congenitally and hopelessly mindless for elimination would offer no more difficulties than their selection for lifelong incarceration. A court-appointed medical committee would be sufficient. When you read through Should They Live, many of the eugenics principles come out. In a way, it is a eugenics manifesto, which is best shown through this paragraph of the Should They Live article, in which he tells us that the principle of limiting certain races through limitation of offspring, or the concerns that we just laid out as eugenics being this human direction, or our self-direction of human evolution. If we were to limit certain races through limitation of offsprings, that Germany in time may have solved her Jewish problem in this way, writing in 1936. He talks to the anti-immigration movement that was active at the turn of the last century, and notes that we zealously exclude certain aliens from our shores. But then he goes on to bemoan birthright citizenship by saying that both on the mainland and overseas territories, their entrance by birth is free and unlimited. And then with inference to race suicide, he notes that it's poetic justice that our fastest growing racial group is the American Indian and not those who are noble in heredity. Lennox is aware probably at this time that the eugenics movement is failing, although the euthanasia movement in America is growing at that point. And so he surveys 75 deans of medical schools in 1936 through 38, asking them what do they think of his article, Should They Live? 20 deans reply of the 75. 8 express unqualified hearty agreement, while only 2 disagreed. 1 stating intrinsically unethical from a Catholic school, the other whole-tone bloodthirsty and cold from a state school. The foremost medical historian at that time is Henry Sigerist at Johns Hopkins University. Sigerist must have received the last letter that Lennox sent out, and reply sends Lennox a letter about his own feelings about hopeless idiots who are half naked in the garden. And he says, these were not human beings, and there's no reason in the world why they should not be destroyed. It should be infinitely more humane than to keep them alive and to nurse them. Now, of course, we all have the 20/20 hindsight and understand the atrocities that were coming. And clearly the American eugenics movements must not have. Although this letter that I show here shows that the American eugenics movement and the German eugenics movement were in communication, this letter being sent by the president of the Minnesota Eugenics Society, Dr. Deit, to Chancellor Adolf Hitler, praising his plan to stamp out mental inferiority among German people. Again, as we're reminded by Paul Gray writing on an article in Eugenics in Time magazine in 1999, the early eugenicists were well-meaning types, and they did not know that they were shaping rationale for atrocities. But those atrocities do come out, and one of the times that they do come out is in Leo Alexander's article published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1949, titled Medical Science Under Dictatorship, in which he clearly lays out the atrocities of the Nazi regime. We know that Dr. Lennox read this article because he, 6 weeks later, has a letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine in response to Alexander's account of what happened in Germany. He titles his letter The Moral Issue, and he tells us that the atrocities committed by German doctors were acute, but our atrocities are long-lasting. And once again, although not calling for the active elimination of the unfit, he still calls for passive euthanasia, the withholding of antibiotics and the withholding of vaccines, should we condemn these people to indefinite number of miserable years. And once again notes that many patients who could be helped but cannot gain entrance to our institutions, which are hopelessly clogged by the unfit. A year later, he sends a letter to the journal Pediatrics in July 1950, and notes that now our immediate problems relate more to quality than to quantity of people. He states that because families of low intelligence are having children and are the largest, that a geneticist named Burt estimates that intelligence scores of the population are falling by 2 points each generation. And in 1950, as Jaideep will tell us, this is a time where the eugenics movement, we know that is founded on principles of fallacy. And once again, he uses an analogy that he uses in his 1936 article, in which he states that imbeciles are clock cases without works. Dr. Lennox's magnum opus is Epilepsy and Related Disorders, a 2-volume set published in 1960. Its authors are both William G. and Margaret A. Lennox. Margaret actually, in a letter that I have, complains that her father paid no attention to her edits or her comments on the book, and wishes that her name had not appeared. The first volume of the set really does with the science and partially the clinical care, which continues into the second volume, which then evolves into psychosocial issues regarding marriage, driving, and work, but continues to include a section on eugenics. For the first time after Leo Alexander's article, 11 years later, Dr. Lennox has clearly tempered his views on active euthanasia or active elimination, noting that obviously none would kill. But as you read through that quote, you'll see that he's still calling for passive euthanasia. In terms of eugenics, he continues to lay out eugenics principles in the second volume. And speaking of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, is a majority opinion in the sterilization case Buck versus Bell, which Jaideep will tell us more about. He calls Oliver Wendell Holmes, in writing that majority opinion on sterilization, wise beyond his years. And in that eugenics section, again, an ideal that is shown to be fallacy by the time of this writing, he tells us that eugenics, wisely applied, can be a force for good in a world overcrowded with persons whose mental endowment is distressingly ineffective. Again, this is in 1960. So who is William Lennox? Well, he is certainly a very accomplished physician investigator who made significant contributions on all fronts in his campaign and our campaign against epilepsy. But on the other hand, while there's widespread support for his views on eugenics in 1938 and earlier, and while he tempered his views of euthanasia after World War II, he truly did fail to modify his endorsement of the principles of eugenics after the atrocities, after the horrible effects of World War II were clear for all to see. So with that, I'm going to end this portion of the lecture. Thank the numerous archivists, Giselle Weiss, who helped with the International League Against Epilepsy history and was instrumental in digging out many of the letters that I showed you today, as well as people like Bill Theodore and Bill Gayard, who made sure that my history was correct in areas that I did not know. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Jaideep.
Thank you, Howard. I want to tell you a story today, a story of who suffered. So these ideas written in books, pamphlets, and journals, we can read about, but then there are human consequences. There are people, there are patients who actually were targets of this. And the young woman I want to introduce you to today, who's at the center of all this, is Carrie Buck, or Carrie Elizabeth Buck Detebor. She was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live, in 1903. She died very close to Charlottesville, just in the valley, in 1983. Why she becomes so important will become obvious to you in a few moments. Carrie Buck was living with her foster parents. At the age of 17, one of the nephews of her foster family raped her. She had a child. Soon thereafter, the foster family decided that they didn't want her and the child. So they sent her to Lynchburg. Why Lynchburg? Lynchburg has a colony for epileptics and feeble-minded. She was admitted there, and there was waiting for him For her, a man named Charles Bell was the superintendent of the Lynchburg Treatment Facility. We call it Lynchburg Treatment Facility because that's what it's called now. It still exists, the building exists. And they were waiting for her. Why? Because her mother, Emma Buck, was a resident of this facility. And Superintendent Bell was a great believer in eugenics, and he had the perfect case. He had the perfect case for eugenic sterilization. He had 3 generations of women in his care that he could take to the courts and prove that eugenic sterilization was the right thing to do. So they get these 3 women, and as you've heard, eugenic movement had been going on for several years. Many states had passed eugenic laws, and these eugenic laws were failing in the courts, especially Michigan and upper Midwest. They went to the courts and they failed, and the eugenic movement was very frustrated with this. So some scientists, or pseudoscientists in my opinion, at Cold Spring Harbor Lab got together a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of eugenicists, and they drafted a model law for eugenics that they felt would pass muster. These laws got passed by many states, including the Commonwealth of Virginia. And they wanted to test this law so that it could go all the way to the Supreme Court. So Superintendent Bell invites somebody down from Boston, from a certain institution, who comes in and declares them, the little girl, Vivian, imbecile, age 6 months. 6 months, she's declared an imbecile. Carrie Buck is declared an imbecile, and so is her mother. Now, what they do is they take her lawyer, Carrie's lawyer, is on the board of directors of the Virginia colony, okay? And of course, they have their lawyer team. They go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great justice, who is very celebrated in that era, 85 years of age at this time, delivers a judgment: 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, legalizing forced sterilization of people on grounds of, quote, being imbecile, okay? There are 2 implications of this judgment. One is that imbecile is an inherited trait. Second is that depriving, quote, imbeciles of their basic rights so benefits the society that you can do it. And how did this come about? This comes about because of a mathematician who was dabbling in human affairs, a guy named Galton, a British originator of statistics, who argued that intelligence was inherited. He wrote 2 books, as Howard referred to, where he said that the genius of people is inherited. And basically he said, rich people have rich kids, so obviously I know that they're all smart, and therefore, and he was misinterpreting Darwinism. What he was trying to do was to apply principles of Charles Darwin, who was his half-cousin, to human affairs, ignoring all the work that Darwin had done, showing that the evolution took many generations, and he was in a hurry to direct human evolution in 1 or 2 generations. And he also got on to Mendelian genetics, which you've all seen many times, where he thought that the dominant traits would take over, and recessive and not so smart people were dominant, and intelligence was a recessive trait, and which leads to all these ideas about race suicide. You will replace us, we'll get replaced by others. So there is a man named Charles Davenport, who graduates from Harvard, travels to London to learn from Galton, and there is a famous dinner there, and comes back with a life mission to study Mendelian genetics amongst unfit. And they start creating these pedigrees, and as these sending out people to homes to collect pedigrees, and it was easier to do if you had institutions. And as you know, there were many, many institutions coming up as we've had the Industrial Revolution, and families are working, and they cannot take care of their disabled relatives at home. So more and more institutions are created, and this is one of the most famous family trees of Kallikak family, where they claim to study thousands of people. But I'll show you that in all these, if you see these pedigrees, and Cold Spring Harbor Lab maintains a whole website on this, on the archives of the Eugenics Research Office. What is sad is among these, they always bring up epilepsy and epileptic. And I can assure you no video EEG monitoring was done to diagnose these people epileptic. The fact is that these characterizations, these phenotypic characterizations were really poor. But yet these are the kinds of things that were used to define and say that intelligence is inherited and you could be imbecile by birth. And they were writing tracts like these that we can take away sterilization, euthanasia, many other things were suggested to limit the number of, quote, unfit people within the society by actively removing them. One big consequence of this, of the passing of Buck versus Bell, is sterilization laws all over the country. So this, Charles Davenport had an assistant named Lawlin who was very proud of his achievement, and he drew this map in mid-30s showing which states had passed compulsory sterilization laws, where their laws were under attack from in judiciary, and which hadn't passed. And it is currently estimated that more than 60,000 Americans were sterilized as a result of these laws. But the number is definitely underestimated, as I'll get to in a bit. Also, there was fear of immigration, as this was a time of serious, a large immigration into Ellis Island, and this is a picture that I've taken from their archives. Immigrants were arriving into US, but then they wanted to show the eugenicists that this was a dangerous trend, and especially dangerous were people from France and Spain, the French and Spain. Now, this is a complicated graph, but just see that this is a complicated bar graph, but I'll just go over it with you. The native-born Americans are down at the bottom, but those French, they are rapists and they are killers. And the Spaniards, of course, commit felonies. So this was used, and these were used to change the immigration laws, and immigration restriction occurs. First immigration restriction was, of course, to get rid of the Asians. Once they got the Asians out in 1924, the second Immigration Restriction Act occurs, and that excludes people from southern parts of Europe. So the French immigration was restricted. Also from Spain and Eastern Europe, Jewish immigration was restricted because of this. So many of those who would have escaped horrors that followed could not enter United States because of these immigration restriction laws. And this is a difficult picture to see, but we have to remember that Nazi laws were inspired by Buck versus Bell. So poor Carrie Buck and Bell, that's what they quoted in 1933 when they started excluding Jews from academic positions. This happened in 1933 already. This is what they were quoting when they were calling for euthanasia and sterilization. But be aware that this was a pseudoscience. It was a completely pseudoscientific movement. And what I'll do now is that there was evidence present going back to 1908 and 1910 that this was based on bad science, really bad science. So the first one is, this is a story near and dear to my heart. Reginald Punnett, who drew those Punnett tables that we all learned in high school, was a professor at Cambridge. He used to play cricket with Hardy. Now, Hardy is a name that many of us from India really remember, because Hardy brought Ramanujan to Cambridge, and There are films made about their relationship, The Man Who Knew Infinity. In fact, Jeremy Irons played Hardy, and I pointed Hardy there. There is a resemblance to Jeremy Irons. But Hardy and Punnett were playing cricket at Cambridge, and it is said that Hardy would have made more contribution if he had played less cricket. But Punnett said that these guys are saying that dominant genes will take over. Can you help me solve this math problem? So Hardy writes this paper to Science. This is the Journal of Science in 1908. And he says, look, I don't understand biology, but there's a little bit of math here that I want to explain to you guys, biologists, because you may be making a mistake. And so he goes on, and I'll just go do the math derivation that he does in that short 1908 paper in Science. So you can do the Punnett's table. If you have a dominant allele with the capital A, a recessive allele with lower a, with the probability of occurrence P and probability of occurrence Q. So you can draw the Punnett's table, where if you have those matings, you'll get AA, lowercase, and lowercase 2a's, and these would have to add up to 1. So they have to be p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1. That's simple math, because all the probabilities have to add to 1. But the implication of this is profound. That was missed. That was missed by all these people who claim to be following a mathematician, Galton. So it is, whatever be the values of PQ and RB, the distribution in the case number continue unchanged after second generation. So that's Hardy's letter. And I'll illustrate it in this graph. In blue is one gene. Let's call it recessive. In red is dominant, but if you have the green is heterozygote. You can keep trying to eliminate the blue gene. Even if you go down to 15%, you have plenty of that gene in heterozygote present. Unless you choose to kill every heterozygote, you're not going to eliminate those traits. So this was mathematically very stupid. Second thing is, the geneticists, and I'll quote top one at this time, Thomas Hunt Morgan, who came up with Drosophila genetics. He got the Nobel Prize in 1933. And Morgan is really opposed to eugenics by 1930. In fact, he tells his students, don't even go close to these people. He made sure that all the American journals of human genetics had removed eugenicists from their editorial boards. They're very alarmed by Germany removing academics from their jobs. And in fact, most of them are, the human geneticists are working to get their friends and colleagues over to US. And a very prominent immigrant in 1933 who saw the writing on the wall was Albert Einstein, who renounces his German citizenship and comes to the United States. American Neurological Association, many of us who are neurologists belong to it, issued a report in 1935. You can read it now, and they say the definition problem, the problem of defining who's intelligent and what are these alleles all about, are so problematic that they say that it invalidates the entire field of eugenics. So this is in print in 1935, long before the writings about eugenics and praising eugenics come out later. So was Carrie Buck and her daughter imbecile? Since they were in Charlottesville, we have their records. Her daughter was Vivian. Vivian was adopted by a Dobbs family. Vivian Dobbs went to Venable High School, Venable School, which is, Scott's shaking his head right close to us. We have her report card. You can see all A's, all A's. She unfortunately suffered from measles and died at the age of 7. Charles Bell always used to try to get Buck family to give her pictures, but they didn't want her to become a postcard child for eugenics, so they never let her be photographed except for when she was 6 months old. How about Buck herself, Carrie? Carrie wrote long letters to Charles Bell because she wanted to take care of her mother. okay? You can read these letters and decide whether she was, quote, imbecile or not, but I can show you in a few words. I would just love to take mother out for this winter. I do not have but 2 rooms, but still she's welcome to come and stay with me. We live out in the country, and we have a pig and a nice garden, and are putting up a lot of things together. This is with Carrie Buck with her husband, Dedamore. I will submit to you that she was capable of love, kindness, and caring. And to remove this person from the society, to deny them rights of reproduction, is not ethical or right. So when all these writings from eugenicists about trying to remove this unfit, what makes her unfit? Tell me what makes her unfit. And as physicians, I've been asked many times, I even got an email last week about, you're applying 21st century political correctness to a problem that existed in last century. So let's set the standards for physicians that have been set since time immemorial. We've been told long before political correctness arrived, and firstly, I admit to political correctness, but this was politically correct 500 BC. First, do no harm. First, we owe our patients minimum duty of not doing harm, right? That everyone agrees to. Politically correct, these guys, all white men, stood around a table and said what? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, right? So we, as in America, agreed that all are created equal. This was debated, and 10 years after that, there was a war. A lot of people lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. But the core principle driving that war was the same. We are all equal. If we are all equal, how are we subject to sterilization? Okay? This Supreme Court ruling has been roundly criticized by both liberals and conservatives. You can go to any of the major websites. You can do a Google search. What are the 10 worst decisions of United States Supreme Court? And this case always makes it in the top 10. These 3 books, the first book here, Erwin Chemerinsky is the dean of University of California, Berkeley Law School. He included it as one of the 3 top cases, besides Plessy and others, where Supreme Court failed. The second book is by Adam Cohen, who's a op-ed writer for New York Times. The third one that I'm most fond of is Paul Lombroso, who did quite a lot about Carrie Buck. Paul Lombroso was a law professor at UVA and a PhD in history, and he fully documented, and many of the documents I've shown you were documents that he got out to show that none of those 3 women were imbeciles. Of course, America itself completely rejected eugenics after the Nuremberg trials. In fact, it was the American prosecutors who drove the punishment. Note how many of them were sent to death for their activities in this regard. There is a happy ending to Carrie Buck's story. Carrie Buck is commemorated in Charlottesville. In fact, there is a plaque honoring her, a marker just outside in the middle of Charlottesville. I drive by it every day, and we remember her for what she had to give up in the name of science. And I wish I could end my lecture right here, and we could go home, and this would be the end of it. But you know, I live in Charlottesville. And this is what happens when we forget our history and try to deny it. It comes back. It comes back as it came back in August of 2017. These young men, they were marching at the University of Virginia, and what did they say? You will not replace us. The very eugenic mantra that we heard 100 years ago. You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Those were the words these young men said in Charlottesville on August 11. Next morning, they were in Charlottesville, there were Nazi flags. And again, a young woman, Heather Heyer, lost her life. So these ideas have consequences. Bad ideas lead to bad consequences. But I want to end on a very hopeful note. As Martin Luther King said in 1968, let us realize that the arc of moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And he was paraphrasing a speaker, Theodore Parker, who was an evangelical priest who was strongly criticizing slavery in 1853. And he was asked, do you think we'll see the end of slavery in our lifetimes? And he said, in the end, this will end. So in the end, justice will prevail. And I want to end by thanking Howard, who brought these ideas to my attention, and also want to acknowledge all the sources. There's a lot of information that Cold Spring Harbor Lab maintains on this. That's one of the best sites. They have link outs to many, many other places where you can find all this information. There is a American Experience PBS show that just came out this fall. Of course, there are lots of books. I was led largely by Paul Lombardo's book on three imbeciles, 3 generations, no imbeciles. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This concludes the Lombroso lecture, which will be its new name. And we invite all of you to continue attending the other exciting symposia and lectures going on starting now. Thank you all for coming.